Good morning. I am Nina Axelson. I oversee the Sustainability and Outreach Programming for Evergreen Energy. I'm joined today by my colleague Michael Ahern, who oversees our System Development Group, and he has led the primary work with the Roadmap to Carbon Neutrality program along with our engineering team and myself. Today we will be recapping the work from our first year cohort. Applications are already open for our second year cohort, and we would happily accept questions about this process at the end of today's presentation. From a logistics standpoint, just want to note a few things. We have a chat and a Q&A function in the webinar. Please use the chat if you have any technical difficulties with audio or video. Questions can be added to the Q&A at any time. We'll make our way through that list once we're done with the presentation, which will take about 30 minutes. If we don't completely answer your question or you have a follow-up, feel free to add that, and you can add questions anytime during the Q&A. If you don't get to a question or something comes up to you later, our emails are available here. And we also can be reached through our website. We plan to make the slides and the recording available after today's session. I do want to just take the one moment to note, I recognize that there is a lot going on in the world, and it's been a very complicated time, especially for folks working in higher education. And we acknowledge that, and we're hoping that by sharing this program, we can help lessen a burden, that we can help with your work going forward. So we appreciate that you took the time out of your really busy schedules in a complicated time to be with us today. So with that, I would like to do a quick introduction to the organization. So some of you know Evergreen and have worked with us before, and that's how you've come across our webinar. Some of you have worked with one of our affiliate organizations, such as District Energy St. Paul, which is our flagship operation. We currently operate utility systems in Minnesota, Wisconsin, California, and Ohio. The California one is just getting up and running here. We also do a lot of work in planning and engineering services with a focus on decarbonization, innovation, and reliability. We are a mission-driven organization, and that really drives our work in the roadmap. We want to be continuously learning and bringing those learnings back to the partners we work with in higher education and community work. So the roadmap program is a real natural extension of that mission-driven work and developing collaborative solutions. So just to take a moment with a few of our decarbonization projects, along with the roadmap cohort, we have several projects underway that are really focused on this same end game. In St. Paul, we have our flagship operation of District Energy St. Paul, which even in the most recent operation is nearly 45% renewable thanks to biomass combined heat and power. We are just wrapped up a carbon neutrality plan for that utility and have some really great short-term opportunities with that system on the heating and cooling side, improving efficiency, and then long-term getting to carbon neutrality by 2050. We've had the privilege of working with our partner in Oberlin, with Oberlin College in Ohio. They are working towards carbon neutrality by 2025 and will start their steam to hot water conversion of their district system this year on design and engineering. And then we have two great geo-exchange projects in Minneapolis and San Francisco. Both are really community-focused, eco-district type projects and are really looking at the broad definition of sustainability. And just for the note here, when we talk about geo-exchange for our organization, that umbrella term includes aquifer thermal energy storage, traditional geothermal, sewer exchange where you have a heat sink and heat source, and deep water cooling. So just a broad umbrella term for us. So now to the roadmap. When we were thinking about all the work we had done with our partners, there was certainly this commonality of great master plans, great intentions, highly committed systems, stakeholders, leadership. And if you look at the process from a really high level, it seems really simple that you do these steps and you get to carbon neutrality. Well, any of us who have worked in that know that it's not that simple, and it gets complicated depending on your finances, what technologies you have available to you, and what your long-term other goals might be. And so we see a lot of systems get stuck, and we've seen some of our own systems get stuck. So we were thinking, what else can we look at here to make a change? So just to show that in a little bit different way, this data is from the American College and University Presidential Climate Commitment. So this has been a long-standing organization and place for higher ed to tap in. For our higher ed partners joining today, you might represent some part of this spectrum. Just as a little bit of centering here, these are percentages of emission improvement, and there are some schools that are further to the right that we left off because they're really outliers in having increased their greenhouse gas emissions significantly. And then it's really great to see the few schools that are on the far left, excuse me, a few of them have even made it over the finish line to carbon neutrality. What we see pretty commonly is that folks are still using a lot of off-campus RECs, offsets to reach that goal. But as you can see, most of the schools are still in the middle. Many have done a lot of energy efficiency improvements, and we're glad they're focusing on that low-hanging fruit. But lots of opportunities still left, in particular around the thermal systems. So in our experience, and what has been shared by all our colleagues, we see these common challenges. And again, if we pause to consider the impacts of COVID-19, we would foresee that there will be even greater challenges with maintenance, competing priorities, constrained access to capital, and just all the things that are going to come with the uncertainty, especially for our higher education campus partners. And these challenges have to be overcome alongside many different pressures, many different people who want to be part of the decision-making process, and the realities of reliable and cost-effective systems. And then we add on to that the continued pressure and threat of climate change that still needs to be addressed with some urgency. So I'm guessing everybody has had a moment in a project where these things have come up and been a challenge. So this led us to a hypothesis, thinking of all these factors at play. What could we do to help move the needle? What is the magic formula that gets things unstuck? Well, we're a little more scientific than that. So instead of looking for a magic formula, we're really trying to think of what is the methodology? What thing in the process could you improve that gets you from a study that's sitting on the shelf to actual implementation? So with this in mind, we launched in 2019, our Roadmap to Carbon Neutrality program. And we were really excited to have 3 schools from Minnesota selected in this program. For those of you joining us from outside of Minnesota, just to give you a little bit of landscape here, the University of Minnesota Morris is one of the schools in the greater University of Minnesota network in Minnesota, and it's on the western side of the state in a more rural area than the Twin Cities. College of St. Benedict, sort of similar, near a larger city, but in a little bit more rural setting. And I think that mostly matters when we're just thinking about what might be the prevailing utility or what kind of land might be available for these projects as we think about on-site opportunities. And then the University of St. Thomas, who is our only urban system. Most of their campus is in St. Paul, and they do have a small Minneapolis campus that was not really the focus of this exercise. So in shaping the pilot, we needed an organizations that had already taken the step to commit to carbon neutrality. We would certainly consider an application for someone, and we've been asked that, who has not made this commitment yet. We just recognize that there's a lot of work that goes into getting leadership committed to this point, and we want to be thoughtful about that. We want hurdles that are realistically can be overcome by this process. And if you don't know our process very well, that might be a little bit hard to define, but that's what we want to offer you in this webinar. And then really a committed partner to go through the work on the ground, guided and assisted by us to try and get all the components together. But we know that that takes multidisciplinary buy-in. So it's not just one department or one leader that is looking to make this happen. So that's really how we got to today. And I'm going to turn this over to Michael to provide a little bit more detail on the analysis and the forecasting for the partner schools. Take it away, Michael.
Thanks, Nina. Welcome everybody today. Thank you for joining us. As Nina mentioned, we had 3 colleges, universities within the state of Minnesota that were part of our initial cohort. That was not specifically purposeful in the sense that we were only selecting campuses within the state. It happened in that way, particularly because of the breadth of the reach for the initial application process. As we'll talk about near the end of this presentation, we're going to be coming out with version 2, round 2 of the program, and we definitely would like to be hearing from campuses across the country who are interested in decarbonizing and interested in getting some help in doing that. If you can jump to the next slide, please, Nina. What I'd like to talk through is the 3 campuses that we worked with. Give a little bit of a high-level informational setting of exactly how the campus is set up today, and the steps we're taking to help them lay out a path to carbon neutrality. And then at the end, we'll talk about some commonalities across and some differences across those 3 campuses and some of the things that we learned as we went through this process. So University of Minnesota Morris, as Nina mentioned, is on the western end of Minnesota, out in a very rural area. 1,600 student enrollment, about 1 million square feet of campus space. They have been on the cutting edge of decarbonization and energy efficiency. They've have on-site renewable wind power. They have on-site solar PV. They have a biomass gasification facility that they invested in several years back for purposes of burning localized corn stover or gasifying that corn stover. And so a very progressive campus that has impressed us all along the years in their mission toward decarbonization. And we were engaged with them to help them get that extra bump to lay out a detailed, practicable, implementable plan to get there. Next slide, please. So some of the dynamics of Morris that really set them up, they're roughly 70% of their electricity is already renewable. And if they actually retired the RECs attributable to their on-site generation with their wind and their solar, they'd actually achieve carbon neutrality on the electric side with just in and of itself right there. So that they've already made fantastic strides, and they're set up well to get to that. They have an existing biomass gasification facility that doesn't necessarily operate optimally at the moment, and there are some opportunities for enhancing that facility. Perhaps bringing in some other fuel sources that are local and renewable and could serve the majority, if not all, of their thermal loads, which would then help them eliminate their gas consumption on site. Next slide. So when we talked to Morris, we looked at both some dynamics within the broader community as well as the infrastructure that they already have in place. And we modeled out several different opportunities for them to decarbonize. And what we learned is, because of the past investments they've made, there's a number of very viable solutions that are cost competitive with if they stayed with a continuation of business as usual. So you see on the graph here, the far left column is business as usual life cycle costs over a 30-year term. And then you go across the chart, you can see that the integration of wood chips as a biomass fuel source with the existing gasifier, a geothermal heat pump solution going to a low temperature hot water system with their campus. Most of their buildings are already hot water. So the conversion from steam to hot water will be relatively inexpensive. There's a localized ethanol plant that has a significant amount of waste heat that it emits into the atmosphere, capturing that waste heat and integrating with a hot water loop to serve the campus. And secondarily to that, we've been talking to community partners about the local school and the local hospital possibly also connecting to that. And then even wind generation and then electrifying the campus is something that showed itself to be relatively competitive from a life cycle cost perspective, certainly a much higher capital cost up front, but still a viable opportunity. Next slide. So what we've been working with the Morris folks on is really a two-staged approach here. The foundation for decarbonization for them is the conversion from steam to hot water. And if they go to that low temperature hot water system, it enables them to have as many options available to them as possible. And then continuing to work through the details of the four most viable renewable source opportunities, whether it be the biomass, integrating biomass into the existing gasification, wood chips into the existing gasification facility, capturing heat from the ethanol plant, or going to a geothermal or wind solution. All of these show very financially viable. All of these show to be very technically implementable and compatible with their infrastructure on campus. And so it's an exciting stage for the Morris folks, because now they've got something tangible that they can start speaking off of with their leadership and with other stakeholders as they look to implement and get to that decarbonization goal. That's a quick summary on Morris. We'll jump to St. Ben's next. College of St. Ben's is also in the rural part of Minnesota, really central Minnesota. Roughly the same size from a square footage standpoint, roughly the same size as far as enrollment is concerned. St. Ben's was one of the original charter signatories to the ACU PCC back in '07. Next slide. Just some high-level stats on their consumption. You get a sense of what their loads are, both from a thermal and an electric standpoint. The campus operates very efficiently and has invested a lot of their money in their controls and how the campus operates, and not necessarily in decarbonization strategies per se, but in reducing all of their consumption, reducing their carbon footprint just by way of being a much more efficient campus. Next slide. I should note that they have looked at some sporadic renewable opportunities, particularly on a building by building standpoint, but they have not implemented anything of significance yet. Some of the challenges for St. Ben's to decarbonize, though, are that the campus operates so well right now. They have a very low cost of utilities. They're on both an interruptible gas and interruptible electricity rate. They consistently rank among the lowest energy consumers in their benchmarks, both with industry and other campuses. Their infrastructure is in fantastic condition. They don't anticipate any significant renovations in the next several decades. And so those are a number of challenges that the campus actually faces. While it's great for them, and it's a great position for the campus to be in, when you're looking at what can tip the scale to enable decarbonization to be cost effective, all of these are dominoes up against that decarbonization strategy. And then, of course, as every campus is facing right now, the concerns around what post-COVID looks like for campuses, and the continued concern around enrollment. Really, they stack up against making any significant investment in infrastructure when you don't really need to do it today, because this campus is run so well and operates so well and so cost effectively. The next slide. What we've been working through with St. Ben's is the decarbonization goal is still very important, and it's still something that they are committed to. We just need to figure out the right time for that to happen. So the St. Ben's is tied to a utility that has pledged to be carbon-free by 2050 and 80% carbon-free by 2030. So just by way of that relationship, they'll continue to decarbonize the electric side of their energy systems. They will incrementally continue to enhance the way the campus operates. They have a lot of great ideas about when buildings are coming on and coming off, how they interface with the utility, since they are uninterruptible for both services. And so they're in our working sessions with them. It was fantastic to hear all the ideas they have about how their buildings can be consume less and less energy, and the campus can consume less and less. And then what we are working through is identifying the most viable, localized renewable solutions that can be implemented, and the point at which that it will make sense. So the decarbonization strategies may not be implementable today, and may not be implementable 10 years from now, but there will be a point at which there will be requirement for significant infrastructure reinvestment. And we can identify the triggers that will have to be in place for whichever is the optimal renewable strategy to be implemented when those triggers come in place. And so we're working through the final details of that with the St. Ben's folks now, and I anticipate that will be the conclusion and the recommendation there is let's wait for some significant renovation triggers to implement whatever becomes the most cost-effective solution and the most viable solution for St. Ben's. We'll jump to St. Thomas, our third partner. This much different campus, right in the heart of Minneapolis and St. Paul. They actually have their campus, multiple campuses spread throughout both cities, and even within St. Paul, which is the map you see on the right, they really have 3 distinct campuses and central or energy systems within the St. Paul campus, a northern, and eastern, and then a southern, as you can see on the map there. Go next slide. I should note that the northern campus, the infrastructure is in very good condition. They just recently have gone through a renovation of buildings on that campus, and so in looking at or starting to develop the plans for St. Thomas, it was determined that the North Campus may be the campus that we wait on, and rather focus where upcoming work might be occurring. St. Thomas has a commitment to be carbon free by 2035. They've made fantastic strides at becoming a more efficient campus, and you can see some of the statistics on this slide. You jump to the next, please. You jump to the next slide, please. And you can see it in the statistics here too. St. Thomas made a decision several years back. They had been participating in some REX programs. They decided rather to invest that money in the campus and significantly reduce their energy consumption by way of those investments. And you see the results of that just with the reductions that they realized. And then go to the next slide, please. You also will see that the result is they have nearly a 40% reduction in their carbon emissions since the 2007 baseline. Those numbers, again, St. Thomas is also tied to the local utility grid that is decarbonizing, 80% by 2030, 100% by 2050. So on the electric side, they have a nice path to get to carbon free just by way of that partnership. And our focus really was more so on the thermal side. We go to the next slide. So as I mentioned, the South Campus is a campus that will be going through some major renovations over the next several years. And we decided together that it's a great time to leverage that renovation to implement decarbonization strategy and invest in local energy solutions. Most of the buildings on the southern half of this campus are going to go away. A new STEM building is going to be developed somewhere, looks like right about in the middle of the campus. And the university is going to leverage that opportunity to connect all of the buildings, both via a hot water loop and a chilled water loop, which is something they don't have today. Today, they have mostly decentralized cooling production, a little bit of consolidated heating, but not of any significance. And because of all of the renovation that's going to be happening on the campus, they're going to take advantage of that opportunity to connect all the buildings. You can go to the next slide, please. So we're working through the final details of our modeling to lay out exactly what is the optimal renewable solution for St. Thomas. But again, we want to, they will continue to invest in their energy efficiency across all campuses. We will leverage this renovation to identify the most beneficial opportunities to decarbonize. For St. Thomas, given their location, we're not going to be putting a large solar array in the middle of St. Paul or a wind farm. So you've got pretty focused on some beneficial electrification, leveraging the investment that the local utility is making. And whether it's geothermal or aquifer thermal energy storage, those look to be one of the two most ideal solutions for decarbonizing this campus. And we're just working through the final modeling of those solutions now. And then we are having some discussions about on the North Campus, while there isn't any significant renovation expected in the near future, possibly working with some local partners to pilot a biogas project for the North Campus. So the 3 campuses, I just want to touch on a few things before I hand it back to Nina. I mean, when you look at the commonalities, one of the things we learned through this first cohort is data availability is so different from campus to campus, and can be a very significant challenge. And quite candidly, that was why some of this process took a little bit longer than we had expected when we kicked off. We've become much better at laying out for this type of analysis, focusing exactly what information we'll want and need from a campus, and helping them gather it in an effective manner that doesn't prolong the overall study. So I think that was one thing that we took to heart that could be improved upon as we go to the next stage of this program. Cross-functional participation within each college or university is critical. It has to be all departments, facilities and the sustainability department and the finance department and leadership within the campus, and the facilities folks, all of them have to be integrated and involved in the process for it to be as successful as possible. Having some student participation is something that we inherently knew to be very important, but really showed itself to be so valuable with several of the partners that we worked. And that is something you'll see in the application process going forward that we're asking for as a commitment, because it's a great learning opportunity for students on the campuses, but it's also a great way for us to have somebody that we can connect with quickly while other folks are focused on their day jobs to get access to information and to chase some things down. Clearly, all campuses are different. You saw that even with these three that we worked through, and so as you see with any successful project, it can't be a cookie cutter template. It has to be adaptable. Our programs that we lay out and our solutions that we lay out always have to be considerate of the local dynamics of the campus, the dynamics of the community around that campus, and then we always want to be looking for local solutions, because that's the most successful projects are the ones that do invest in the local community. And then lastly, investing, as you saw, both St. Thomas, St. Ben's, and Morris, investing in energy efficiency first is really the best first step for any of these campuses. Let's lower the amount of energy that these campuses need. And then that always makes the carbon-free solution more practical and ultimately more financially viable to implement. So with that, I'll kick it back to Nina, and she can summarize some things.
Thank you, Michael. It's even having been in the midst of this project, just listening to Michael recap it and recognizing how much we've learned and how far we've come with those schools this year is just always great to see laid out like this. So I just want to have a few summary items to cover here, and then we'll get to your questions. So from a sources and technologies standpoint, this is always a work in progress. I think it's great that as an energy community, we've come a long way from having this much more confined set of opportunities. Certainly I can understand for other folks, as it gets broader, that can also be really overwhelming. So I think figuring out ways to navigate emerging tech is going to continue to be an important aspect of how you look at carbon neutrality options. We also, as we're trying to navigate what those opportunities are, really want to make sure we're bringing our partners back to what their initial goals are. If it's carbon and efficiency and cost effectiveness, making sure that we have a way to assess what is coming into the marketplace to make sure that by going one direction, because you've seen another school do it and they happen to be in the South and you're in Minnesota or Wisconsin, and once you start to play that out, that those costs or those inefficiencies of that technology in a different place may not work. So recognizing that that's a really critical part of this, on top of course, what Michael already said about starting with efficiency as our number one thing to make these other things possible. Also recognizing that we're in a moment where things are going to be coming into the marketplace in the next, I'll say 3 to 5 years, and 6 months from now, we might be talking about 12 to 24 months, but it seems to be such a dynamic space. So we could be talking about hydrogen and battery storage and other beneficial electrification strategies. And so part of working within the cohort and making sure that we have a really good exchange of information is to make sure that we always have that open to bring the newest and best technologies in to solve things. From the onset of the program, as I mentioned at the beginning, creating a methodology was always a priority for us. So this list is just a snapshot of some of the methodology opportunities. Probably look very familiar to our partners here. stressing the importance of efficiency again, but these seem to be the commonalities that came up the most. And then some of our common lessons that Michael already pointed out, especially around data management, data access, recognizing that, especially in higher education, district energy systems, lack of metering or lack of one streamlined management system can be a challenge. But again, we learned a lot of lessons with that in our first year, and we're excited to apply those into our second year cohort. So with that, we hope you already knew that we had launched the application process, but this is the information for that. The deadline is Friday, August 7th. We are trying to be thoughtful about what kind of planning is going into the fall 2020 related to COVID for campuses. So we're trying to manage that timeline to work with campuses at a time that will work for them. We've already mentioned some of these things about what we're looking for with the partners. I do just also want to make a request, and recognizing that we have both higher education partners and broader utility industry energy folks on our webinar today. We'd really like to see a broader and more diverse application set in this year's process, including 2- and 4-year technical and community colleges who may be overlooked in this type of planning. So we love the partners we worked with this first time, but we also want to just make sure that there's access to this opportunity. And so if you can help us share this information and share this opportunity, that will help us make sure that more people have an opportunity to participate. So with that, I'm just going to share the information about the other webinars that are part of this series. We have an upcoming profile of the University of Minnesota Morris, and we're really excited to have one of the Morris teammates join Michael for that session. So if you were pretty excited about some of the things you saw in that part of the presentation, this will be a deeper dive into the specifics of that program, and you'll get a little bit of perspective from one of the schools from participating. And then our third and final will be more focused on the financing and business side of how this all works, recognizing even our best technical solutions are only going to make sense if we can get them established into the organization and institution in a meaningful manner. So with that, I'm going to shift us to our Q&A portion of the session. As of right now, I do not see any open questions in our Q&A. Just a reminder, oh, here we go, first one. I appreciate Bill going first here because that helps us get rolling. So Michael, let's see, we've got in regards to St. Thomas, is there any gain in expanding the effort to include St. Kate's, McAllister, Concordia, and the Ford site? I want to turn it over to Michael to talk more specifically about those opportunities. I do just want to mention that actually quite a few years ago, maybe 2012, we did a study with the Department of Energy that was an energy island study. And there's such a concentration of higher education and industrial manufacturing sites along basically this I-94 corridor between Minneapolis and St. Paul. And we were looking at exactly this type of thing to say, you already have some really effective, efficient district systems here. Could they benefit from having connection points to each other? Would you lower your efficiency or increase your flexibility in that connection? So from that theoretical standpoint, there are some advantages, but I'll hand to Michael to answer more specifically.
Yeah, and thanks, Bill, for the question. We did not consider that growth as part of the initial assessment. We did want to stay concentrated at each individual campus. We have had conversations with stakeholders from all of those institutions or locations that you laid out, and we're always looking for opportunities to expand the footprint of these systems. There's as you may know, since you brought up those different sites, there's quite a difference, or there's a bit of a distance between each of the campuses or locations. So you'd have to overcome that, particularly because they primarily run through residential neighborhoods without much added load that could get connected. So the financial benefits would maybe quite challenged to do that. But certainly if you could get an initial system going, you're always looking for opportunities to grow that initial system beyond its initial footprint.
And I don't want to go down the rabbit hole that is like any one other particular project, but for those who are not in the Twin Cities area, the Ford site was a former Ford manufacturing site that was looked at as a major brownfield redevelopment. and had energy studies for about 12 years. We were fortunate to participate in some of the early advisory committees with our CEO, Ken Smith. And then Michael and I were involved in later implementation and analysis planning. I can say that aquifer thermal energy storage, which is shown to be really promising at several of the sites that we've been looking at, and our partner Underground Energy, Mark Worthington, did some great assessment for the site. That wasn't chosen as the go forward plan from a district perspective, but it doesn't mean there weren't a lot of lessons learned about that kind of application in a brownfield site redevelopment. Would you add anything?
And Bill, I would, yeah, well, Bill, I would just add one thing, and you may or may not know the Morris community that well, but actually, in the Morris circumstance, that type of question was exactly the one that we asked as we looked at the solution for them. Is because there's a school, the high school and elementary school is right across a ball field from the college. There's a hospital right across the street, a number of buildings very close within the community. That was a circumstance where we did look at this as both a community opportunity as well as the decarbonization of the campus. And we have another such example where we're doing that in Oberlin, Ohio. Nina touched on earlier. The Oberlin is decarbonizing its campus, but the campus is the community to a great extent, and they want that investment and that opportunity to be made available to all of the community, not just the campus itself. And so you do have certain circumstances where that is more viable because of the dynamics around the campus. And to any extent possible, that is something we're always looking for, is how can we expand that opportunity of decarbonization to serve as many of the community stakeholders as possible.
So Michael, right now we don't have any other questions in the queue. So before we maybe let everybody go a little early today, I just want to ask if there's anything that, just for the sake of time, you didn't mention that you'd like to add as a parting thought.
You put me on the spot, but I think we pretty much hit on everything. So I think I'm okay.
I also then fulfilled my obligation to put you on the spot at least once during this webinar. So that's good. All right, well, we really are just so grateful for everybody for joining us today. This was our first Evergreen Energy webinar, and so we are really open to your feedback. If there's a survey, I believe, that's going to go out to all registered folks who joined us today. So please be as open and constructive as possible. So we have 2 more webinars scheduled, and we want to make sure that they're really valuable experience for the folks who take the time to join us. And again, just want to make the request that as much as possible, if you can help us get the word out about the program, and if you have higher education partners or you are a higher education partner, that you take the time to look at whether this is a fit for your goals, and just feel free to reach out to us with any other questions, or if you just want to chat further about how we've developed the program. I'm just going to look really quickly because we have some chat things here. Okay, great.